This is Unprepared, a Novus Global podcast. You can't always prepare for what the game throws at you, but you can prepare for who you're going to be. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. Chicago coming at you.
But we're actually in LA.
Yes, we're in LA. But the show has to begin with mentioning Chicago.
Chicago.
Guys, we're here. We're doing it. It's officially happening. How does it feel?
Amazing. Because we did it.
No, we haven't interviewed anybody yet.
Yeah, this, what are you, in the future?
Yeah.
Well, so I've already visualized all the conversations, and I see them going incredibly well. But no, all jokes aside, we're here to try something new. And so having Matt, having a player agent, having Joe and myself from Novus Global Sport, working with the mindset and the mentality and the character of athletes, to have a conversation, to sit down, to slow down, to interview athletes about, I think, conversations that don't get a lot of oxygen or a lot of light, is incredibly exciting.
We all had this idea of, like, let's collaborate on a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of us also said we don't want to just have the same old type of podcast. We're trying to figure out, how can we have a really meaningful conversation? Why is this important? And why do we need to be the ones who are having this specific conversation? So we're beating around ideas and figuring out, what do we talk about? And then the Will Smith and Chris Rock event happens, and that was
Sorry, what happened?
So
miss
for
something?
those
I'm not
of us that-
familiar.
Did I miss
Right,
it?
well, you were in
Yeah.
Canada, so
Yeah, we
yeah.
don't get the Oscars. We have our own version
So
of
at the
it.
Oscars,
So you actually got the unedited version of that.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
We saw the real feed. Well, and all jokes aside, like, what happened in that moment was such a juxtaposition between two different internal
Right.
states, and it's easy to pile on and have the conversation about who was bad or who was good in that conversation. But what we're most interested in is, what was the internal conditions of those two people.
Right. Because, yeah, in that moment, right, so a joke was communicated, whether you want to call it a bad joke, a good joke, whatever. Will Smith decided to get up and do something about it, and the thing that he did was slap another human being in front of the world, essentially, and then get back down, sit down, as if nothing happened, and, like, the show continues. Part of what was really fascinating to me was to see how Chris Rock handled that, because he had a variety of options in that given moment. He could have been like, I'm going to attack him back. He could have just ran backstage. You know, he could have kept making fun. But instead he said, okay. And he actually did his job in the moment. Like,
What kind of commitment or internal state is required to do that?
Right.
What's fascinating, though, about this is, from an athlete's perspective, right? If, not that being snapped or slapped in the moment is like the same as any event that an athlete will ever go through on, whether it's the ice, the basketball court, the baseball field. How do you act? Can you prepare so that if something of that magnitude happens to you, you rise to the challenge?
Yeah.
I mean, does anybody know? I mean, I think
Yeah.
part of that, though, is like, as we talked about, what is the character of the individual?
Yeah.
And does that character kind of guide that person or that human being through that individual moment?
Yeah.
And what we want to do, and we've talked about this obviously off air, but, like, what we want to do is have conversations with athletes in sport that we have access to, that other people wouldn't normally be able to talk to, about that, about adversity, about challenge. And you're going to hear some incredible stories, from coaches getting canceled to players getting injured to opportunities coming to the highest of highs to the lowest of lows, and what kind of character is required to hold the ship steady in the midst of, like, how do you, and you said this too, like, how do you prepare for something you cannot prepare for?
Right.
Is the question.
And even it's like, life will slap you. Full stop. You will get slapped. And it's probably not going to be just once. There's probably going to be plenty of slaps coming your way. And are you going to wait until you get slapped to prepare how to deal with it? I think that's part of the question too, is many of us wait till we get slapped to figure out who we're going to be in that moment. And, you know, I know that, at least what I make up is, Chris Rock didn't literally prepare for that, but he prepared in such a way where he was able to be the type of person who was going to withstand things, because comedians take on a lot, right? They get in front of crowds, people say things, people boo. Obviously, there's a lot of media attention, and he developed a way of being that said, I'm going to keep showing up as my best self in the midst of all of this. And that's the thing that he prepared for, and I think that's what we're excited to give to people here with the conversations that we have, as well as our tools as coaches.
Prior to that happening, if you asked 100 people, Chris Rock, Will Smith, which one is more of a stand-up guy, integrity, character, I would say 95% would have said Will Smith.
Which just tells you that what you see and what is true are not the same thing.
Right.
And I know that's the most like predictable thing to ever hear come out of somebody's mouth, especially when you're scrolling the Instagram feed and you're like, oh yeah, that must be the truth.
Right.
It's not, right? The one question resonating in my head though right now is, who are we to be having this conversation? Right? Like, and I mean that, like, who are we? So, Johan, who are you?
You mean literally? Who,
yeah.
Like what?
Who,
well,
like,
I would say, because this is part of, for me, you know, I love basketball, and basketball has been a part of really saving my life growing up in Chicago. If it wasn't for the game of basketball, you know, I think I would have got into a lot of trouble. I grew up in a really bad neighborhood in Chicago, and one of my favorite stories to share is the local gang called the Cobras came up to me one day, and they were literally like, hey, you want to join us? And in Chicago, that was a primary way to stay alive, is by affiliating yourself with a gang, so that if anybody messed with you, you'd be like, you know, I got people to back me up. And at that point in my life, I just looked at him and I said, no, I just want to play ball. Like, I was literally at the schoolyard playing ball, and that's when he asked me, and I said, I just want to play basketball, man. He looked at me and he said, you keep playing ball. And he's like, we got your back, you know? And so I believe that basketball saved my life. I kept pouring my everything into basketball. And, you know, high school, my first year of high school playing ball, I was 5'2". And the biggest thing there was like, I got to grow. I got to figure out, because I'm not going to be the next Muggsy Bogues. And so I figured out some ways to grow, which was sleeping a lot. And I went from 5'2" to 5'4". My sophomore year, 5'4" to 5'11". My junior year, and then my senior year, I was 6'1".
Boom.
And then I received a letter. I was captain of the team, scoring champ, like you name it. And I received a letter to play at the University of Chicago. And I was so excited. Like, this was something that I've been dreaming about for a while. But I didn't know what's my next step, you know? So I take this letter to my academic counselor, and I give it to her. I was like, hey, I don't know what to do next. I just know, like, I'm excited about what's ahead. She reads the letter. She looks at me and she says, you're never going to make it. She says, you're not smart enough to go to the University of Chicago. You're a good basketball player, but you can't cut it in the classroom. And I remember in that moment, I just, like, sank. My heart sank. I took the letter, I left, and I was like, yeah, she's right. And I ended up going to another school, Northeastern Illinois University. And I was like, okay, my first year, I'm going to focus on being a good student. I'm going to focus on academics. And my first year, I made the honor roll. And so I was like, okay, now I'm going to play ball.
Now I can do it.
Now I'm going to play ball. So that summer, I'm like training, preparing. I get an email that says Northeastern's dropping all athletics.
Oh.
And so at that stage in my life, again, I'm an 18-year-old, and I'm like, oh, it's not meant to be. You know?
You didn't question the narrative.
I didn't question it. I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to go to the NBA. If I transfer, I lose. What I knew at that time was, if I transfer, I lose X amount of credits. Do I want to waste this money? Do I want to waste this time?
practical.
Yes, I was very practical.
Making the responsible decision.
Yeah, and so I was like, forget it. Since I'm not going to the NBA, it was just all these reasons. And I ended up playing rec league ball, you know, from that point forward. And people would come up to me and be like, yo, where do you play college ball? And I kept playing ball, and they were like, hey, do you play overseas? And, you know, kept getting better. And I never thought to myself, am I going to attempt to, like, try overseas, because of this moment where I was defeated. I'm like, basketball is behind me. So once I became a coach, you know, once we started to dabble with this work, I was like, wow, look at how really unprepared I was for the moment mentally.
When somebody...
Right? When first it was just an external voice, then it was a circumstance of life, that came at me, and I didn't have the mental tools to work through it in a way to ask myself the question of like, well, how could this be for me? What's the opportunity here? How can this moment be a gift so that I can grow at a higher level? Instead, I shrank, and it's one of the biggest regrets, I would say, of my life. And that's why I want to do this. That's why I do the work that I do, because I want to make sure that, you know, for any athlete that has their moment at whatever stage in their career it is, that they would be able to be prepared mentally, internally, for whatever comes at them.
That's who you are.
That's who I am. What about you guys?
What
about you, Dan?
You want to go? So I'll go quick. I was an athlete, a student athlete in high school. I found a obscure sport in Canada. It's cold and icy, right? So I was a speed skater, a long track speed skater, and found a sport I loved. Like, fell in love with it. Really fell in love with it. I was fortunate to be in one of the best places in the world to train, with the best coaches and the best athletes, literally the best athletes. And in my when I was 20 years old, I was skating with the national junior team, all their skaters. I wasn't part of that team, but I was training with them. And I kept getting dropped by two guys in our training group. And every time I got dropped, I saw the distance between where I was and where they were, and got more and more discouraged and more and more discouraged. And I saw a sports psych, and I tried doing different things. I just couldn't shake. I didn't have the skills, the tools, like Johan was saying, in that moment to navigate that moment of discouragement. And the crazy thing was, at the end of that season, I failed like a class in university. The girl I liked dumped me. Like, it was a great year, and I was being dropped, and I decided I was going to stop skating, and I quit, and I never went back. And it wasn't until like 10, 15 years later, it dawned on me that the guys that were dropping me, like they were number 1 and number 3 in the world that year. And I could see the gap between myself and the top of the world. And all I saw was discouragement, depression. I'm never going to make it. That's what I filled that gap with. And it wasn't until I encountered the work that we do now with athletes that I realized there was a choice in how I could have related to that gap. And much like your story, my story is somewhat similar. And that's put a fire in my belly. That when I meet young players who are, you know, they're talented, but things aren't going their way, or older players, veteran players who, you know, they've had great careers, but they've lost the love of the game. Like, what does it mean to rewrite the narrative in their story? And that's what I'm excited to explore on the show.
Well, so I feel like with the three of us, we kind of all share many things, but one specifically is our heart for what I would say is service.
Yeah.
Right. You know, why you asked the question, who are we to talk about this?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I necessarily have the answer. I mean, we're not sitting here saying, "Oh, we have all the answers. Listen to us." You know, we're the voice that everybody should pay attention to. I think the truth though is, you know, when you think about this problem that we're all trying to solve, we're looking at this really saying, okay, how can we talk to people, as you said? How can we interview these people that we have access to, who are the best in the world? And how can they provide us with a data point that we then can take in and then use that to help us navigate, okay, how can we then fill the gaps for these guys? Because something that, again, we all have is this heart of service. So what is it that the three of us have collectively that we can then come and say, all right, you know, Will Trapp, how can we surround you with all of these tools that you need so that when the time comes that you retire, you now feel like you have everything that you need to make the right decisions, right? Brian Wilson, how can we support you? Or how can we support the next Brian Wilson? The guy who is having Tommy John surgery when he's first getting drafted and then has to have it again after he's a free agent. And what is it that you felt like you needed that you didn't have access to in that moment? That's one of the things that, like, if at the very least what comes from this is really helping or surrounding the next stage of athletes coming through the journey, how can they really have something that these guys that currently we're talking to don't? Then I feel like this was a success. So, you know, for me, playing the game of baseball and other sports kind of growing up, being one of the guys who, you know, while I was physically gifted and I was athletic, I saw other guys at an early age, you know, freshmen in high school, who were performing better than me. And I was obviously the most, you know, the hardest guy on myself, and putting the time in and then seeing the reward from putting the time in and seeing the attention that I was getting from some of these schools, now then going to the next level, playing in college, and then realizing very quickly, wait a minute, like these guys, they're not even trying. I'm here killing myself, and I'm now just raising my level to be where their baseline is. And then going to the next level and seeing it even more. And so taking a step back and realizing, okay, well, one of the things that I did know that I always had was this passion for wanting to help people. If I know the game of baseball and I know athletics and I know sport, what then can I learn about the business of athletics and the business of pro sports? And then how can I take what is needed and to provide this need for these people? I think, again, collectively, we all share in such a necessary thing in professional athletics that I think as we continue this journey, the three of us needing to be open-minded to when we have a guest who shares certain things with us, how can we be receptive to, you know what, we never even thought about that. We never even knew that was an issue or a challenge. We need to help this person or this group of people in this way. So for me, that's if you ask me what is a success at the end of the day with this, that's what it would be. Is giving the Andrew Ladds of the world the tools so that they can be more successful in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise been if we hadn't done this.
This kind of comes down to one critical thing that I think we all agree on, that the deeper conversations of who we are as people are sometimes the greatest sources of human performance that are overlooked, and that we want to create a conversation where we bring stories, we bring insight, we learn from guys who have taken their lumps, been punched in the face a few times, so that we can stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before us and elevate even more the next generation of athlete and the next generation of agent and the next generation of performance coaching, whoever's listening to this right now, to chart a new territory forward. So I'm just excited to be here with you guys to do it.
Likewise.
Yeah, I think as a result of this show, part of the vision for me is, as a result of the conversations that we have, there will be professional athletes who will prolong their careers, who will resurrect their careers. There are people who maybe don't think they can go pro, who will create a professional career because of some of the conversations that we're going to have. And that's at the heart and soul of this, is, this idea of being unprepared, with the slash and the un, because there's a fine line between being prepared and unprepared. And what if you showed up in such a powerful way to be a certain type of person that you were prepared for anything?
Unprepared is a Novus Global podcast, hosted by Matt Hannaford, Dan Leffelaar, and Johan Martinez-Khalilian. Our producer is Iván Lizarde. Sound engineering by Eugene Dufloo. Technical production by K.S. Chacombe. Editing and mix by Iván Lizarde. You can't always prepare for what the game throws at you, but you can prepare for who you're going to be.